we came back, when we came home, I I really looked around and my options were so few. Miami theater at the time of 1979 was there was a company being run by a woman named Ruth Foreman, and she was in North Miami and was sort of doing community theater with but with reach, with wonderful actors and giving them lots of opportunities. And then Zeb Buffman, the infamous impresario Zeb Buffman, was here in Miami. He was at the Jackie Gleason Theater bringing stuff in. And the old Coconut Grove Playhouse had been, sort of in financial straits with its last team of owners. But it was being revived because there'd been a little company at the Museum of Science called Players Rep. And again, a better than a community theater, professional theater, but, a very tiny, great, wonderfully active organization. But they were getting kind of long in the tooth, and they needed something to refresh them. And it had been a place, by the way, that my uncle, Douglas Fairbairn, had written a couple of plays that were produced there. And I was a thespian. This goes back. I was a thespian in high school, and he approached the people at Players Rep and said, "My niece needs credits for her thespian club. Can she be an usher here for this show?" And they said, "Sure, she could be an usher." And I remember it was a very adult play. and I was the usher. But again, he had shared the original novella with me. And it was called The Voice of Charlie Punt. And it was filmed by Playhouse 90. And I'd love to get my hands on it. I haven't seen it. But with these two actors, Robert Redford and Joanne Woodward, as the young leads. And anyway, so I had a relationship with the Players people. And so I went marching up to the Coconut Grove Playhouse, and it was, the building was called that, but it had now been acquired by the Players people. And the Players people realized they really wanted to be a regional theater. And so this incredible renaissance was happening. They had a professional artistic director, a guy named Bob Cantor, and then they had hired as the executive director a guy by the name of G. David Black. And David had been Joe Papp's original managing and executive director as they invented the public theater and Shakespeare in the Park. And David, he and his partner, Herbie Stannard, had decided to take this flyer and go to Miami and be warm. It was like New York got old. David was there for a long time. And I mean, he had traveled to Trinity, he traveled to Houston, but this was intriguing to him. So this is who I actually interviewed with, was this man, G. David Black, who I was trying to impress as this 24-year-old, playwright from Miami and Washington, D.C. And I'd been at the Folger and I'd gotten married, and he latched onto that. He said, "Oh, you're married?" I said, I am. "So you have an income?" I said, "Well, my husband has an income." And he says, "But you don't really mean much, right?" I said, "Well," he says, "you want a job. You're bored." I said, "I am so bored. Please hire me." And he said, "Well, there's only a position available right now, and that's in the marketing and PR department." And why don't you start there before we hand you the keys to the kingdom? And I said, okay. So one of the first things in the marketing and PR department at Players State Repertory Theater, which was what it was called in this old building, was a laser Mimeo machine. And it was my job to take the scripts and make laser copies of them, which were then run off and give those to the actors and the directors. That's how you did it. We didn't have the money yet there that I'd had at Folger for a copy machine. So this was how we were doing it. And I became known as Yvette Mimeo at the Coconut Grove Playhouse. But I did stay there. I stayed there for about 5 years, and I outlasted Bob Cantor and David Black, although he remains my friend at 91 still. But Jose Ferrer came, and suddenly we were just another kind of theater company, going from a regional theater of, the proper recipe. There's the classic, and there's the new play, and then there's the thing off Broadway and the thing on Broadway. But for Miami audiences, it had been this wonderful season of, of stuff to see in a way we had never actually experienced theater before. And I got so much training out of that in my various roles at the Playhouse. And then when Jose came, suddenly we had a different bunch of people coming. And I think my favorite was when George Clooney showed up, because George Clooney was a nobody. He was just Jose's nephew, and he was kind of in between things. And he wasn't the one that Jose was hiring for, like some of these shows, Life with Father and something else. But he was fun enough to come in my office and flirt on my couch. And I kept thinking, there's big things ahead for you, young man. Big things. But that was, so that was a good training for me from an administrative point of view. I was doing some writing. I was actually doing some nice writing, but around the time that Jose left and another guy came in, Arnold Middleman, I was ready to move on. And I wasn't sure he was going to want to keep me anyway. So I learned how to quit. I learned how to resign. And I'm really glad I did for a lot of reasons.